We've hit 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and call to order our special meeting of the Mason County Board of Commissioners for Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance and I've asked Commissioner Trask to lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it
which it
stands,
stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice
justice
for
for
all.
all.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll go ahead and move into roll call. I'll ask our clerk to please take the roll.
Commissioner District 1, Randy Netherland.
I'm here.
Commissioner District 2, Kevin Schutte.
Here.
Commissioner District 3, Sharon Trask.
I'm here.
Very good, thank you. Moving on to item number 4, we have a public hearing continued from January 31st, 2022 to consider the proposed extension of the Belfair Sewer. Ask staff to brief, and it looks like Mark is going to start us off.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. Thanks for having this continuation of our original public hearing. I am looking to see, I've got Loretta and Richard on with me. So we've got an agenda. I was actually just pulling up. Apologize. We have an update. Basically, we have gone to the Public Works Board and asked for a couple of changes to our original contract with them. The first, Loretta, would you like to go over those changes, or I can do it and you can fill in? And basically, we went to the Department of Commerce and asked them to do an administrative change. So originally, the way the loan was written up, the debt that would leverage the loan would be a revenue bond that was payable based on fees charged to individuals within that utility district. I reviewed some footage of board's discussion. I think it was back in April of 2020, I'm thinking. And it was clear to me that the board had actually not wanted it to be a revenue bond and wanted it to be a general obligation bond. So the first thing that we asked the Department of Commerce to do would be change the special terms and conditions for loan security from what was originally listed as a revenue bond to a general obligation debt. That general obligation debt would be financed through 0.09 funds and the second quarter % of the real estate excise tax that we collect here at the county. That portion of the administrative, they call it an administrative change, has been processed by the Department of Commerce. And the other section of it was a change in the scope of the way the original project was planned out. And Loretta, if you could kind of help walk the board through that, I would appreciate it.
Sure, glad to, Mark. Thank you. The scope that was originally conceived of and requested for funding described a purple pipe for reclaimed water heading up to serve the PSIC industrial area. It also included a sewer connection up to Lake Flora Road. And that was essentially the gist of what was described and what the legislature funded through the Public Works Board loan. And as a result of just going through the design process, that scope has certainly changed. And the purpose of going back to the legislature is to make sure that the loan offer still meets that the intent is still met. So we submitted a request to revise the scope, and that is being processed at this time.
So does the board have any questions on those items?
Commissioner, any questions?
At this time.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to let, I think, are we going to have Richard go over the Belfair Sewer Code revisions?
Sure, that would be great. There was a question during the last hearing about whether it was 200 feet or 500 feet to connect to sewer service. And so that prompted Richard to relook at our entire code. And he doesn't have an answer to the 200, 500. And
That was the easy part.
some direction from commissioners about just a code cleanup in general. Richard.
All right. Yeah, that is true. I read a lot of resolutions till I finally found when it happened. And it was resolution 4617 that clarified it, attempted to clarify it. It is 200 feet from the property line to the nearest sewer. It used to be 500, changed it to 200. Looking through the code, actually there was a comment during that public meeting that really kind of spelled it out. Terry Drexler commented that there was a number of places that would need to be updated. So thus I started looking at the code more in depth, and yeah, we need to update it. There's certain things, Harstein Island's not part of it anymore. There's a lot of code cleanup. And so I'm going to attempt to merge all of our sewer codes into one sewer code. And with my methodology that I'm going to undertake is the most restrictive is what I'll write in there. Of course, I'm going to bring all of this to you. I'm sure I'm going to be taking this back to you through a number of briefings. I've got questions on the multifamily tax incentive that sunsetted. And so if that's something we're going to want to continue. So yeah, I've got a lot of questions, rates, rate structures, stuff like that. But the simple 200 feet, that was the question. That was the answer. It's 200. Do you have any questions?
I guess just a process question for me. So steps forward on that, that does need to come before the commission once you've got it all finalized, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Some of those I would suggest that we could do through regular board briefings for certain code type things. I definitely think as we get into discussing rates and fees, those are something that we need to be clear and let the public know that we're going to be discussing them. I think as it applies to Belfair as we move forward, and we obviously don't have information, I think, tonight to enough information for the board to make a decision on this project. So we're going to have to continue this hearing because we have not received confirmation back from Department of Commerce. The legislature has accepted the scope change. So the actual change from what Loretta described was in the original plan to what's in our current plan. So I don't feel like we are in a position tonight where we can recommend the board take action to move forward on that. So I believe that it's up to the board, but if you'd like to continue this public hearing, we could continue it into the future. And we could address some of those things at future public hearings associated with the Belfair Sewer.
Mark, do you have a recommendation on if we did continue on length of continuation?
Yeah, I think that I realize that the ledge, I think, wraps up their session in 9 days, but I think that we need at least 30 days to really look into some of this stuff and come back with some additional detail associated with the changes to the code that are necessary and the decisions that the board is going to have to make regarding future rates for Belfair, as well as some of those fees that are charged for the different type of development that could occur in the future.
And Mark, we might want to double check when we do codes, especially since that's not what this was set up to do. We do codes, it may have to be a special hearing for any adjustment of a code to specify it out. And I just want to make clear to the public, because the first thing they're going to say is, because there was a concept of merging of systems, it's merging of the codes, not merging of the systems. There is no discussion of merging of the systems that I've ever heard. The systems are separated, and they have to remain that way, as far as I know, because of the debts and stuff like that. So it's
100%.
merging of codes.
Correct. It's to create a consistent code, right? So we have code that is defined for the specific utilities. I apologize, I don't know all of the details associated with this. I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around some of all the details associated with the utilities that we have here at Mason County. But I think that that what Richard is recommending that we do is to look at the code associated with those utilities and how we apply fees, and kind of put those into one section so that it's not distributed throughout, easy to find, easy to understand.
Right, that's exactly right. There's enough similarities that Belfair code references North Bay references Belfair. A lot of this could just be one code, but you're right. There's no merging of systems here. It's just making the codes easier to use, more understandable for everybody. But rates and stuff, that they're all their own.
So, and I think the other thing is, so maybe more along to the point that Commissioner Nevin was making. So this hearing that we're continuing is directed at issuing a bid. This has the code revisions may be important to the overall decision, but this isn't the right vehicle to make those decisions. And so when we did the code revisions in 2017, 18, those were handled in their own way. And they were handled just through an action agenda process that we go through with our regular business meeting. And so while maybe important to the overall conversation, not necessarily germane to the decision that would be in front of us here, I still support continuing this hearing as we wait for more information from the legislature on the scope change. But one doesn't have to align with the other necessarily. We don't have to do them both at the same meeting. So the continuation of this doesn't really have much to do with the code revision, other than we're talking about the system as a whole.
Thank you for that clarification. So I think that my intent was, I feel like we've got some great public attendance at this meeting. And so, individuals that are interested in what's going on in Belfair and the decisions that are before the board as we move forward. I was hoping that we could kind of combine some of those things, but 100% have heard what you said and agree that we may need to go through different processes for addressing the code and potentially the rates. So making sure that people are aware that those are separate processes and how they can attend and participate in those would be important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, having this participation in that process is important. It's just when we look at how we set up special meetings, the agenda is pretty tight. And if you were to add something on to this from a decision perspective, you can talk about whatever you want. But if there was another decision added onto this, I think it could be challenged since it wasn't a part of the original special meeting. So we just need to be mindful of that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I have made a note of that, and I will make sure that I'll work with Tim Whitehead to make sure that we do this correctly. And I think that we actually have a good list of contacts from information that submitted comments to this that we may be able to reach out to and just let them know when we're having our next meeting associated with something going on in Belfair, whether it's a code change. I'm sure that individuals are very interested in the discussions that we have on rates as we move into the future. Those types of things, I'll make sure that we do that correctly. So is there any other questions for Richard regarding the code?
Commissioners, any questions?
I have one, I guess it's more procedural also. When in reviewing the codes and moving it to 200 feet, how does that affect our planning? So like planning and building, Cal, their division, those codes have to align, right?
I believe that's the rule that they look to when reviewing plans. Is that correct, Loretta?
Yes, and Commissioner Trask, that was the issue. The 200 feet is found in the KEL codes in the planning section, and the utility section still references 500 feet. So that's one of the things that we need to clean up. It was clear that the intent from commissioners was 200 feet, and we just need to make sure that it says 200 in both sections of the code.
Great.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I can give a little historic aspect of that.
Okay.
Okay, so originally, before I was ever here, when they first originally put together the proposal for Belfair, they wanted to get as many hookups they possibly could. So they stretched out, even though North Bay was shorter, they stretched it out to be 500 feet. A couple of things started happening. You're forcing people to also put pipe in that 500 feet because it's 500 feet to the property line, not to the house. So the house could still be another several hundred feet back. And it got to be quite a burden on the property owners. And we were forcing people to hook up that couldn't afford to get even close to it. And then when you're talking about large distances like that, you also have wetlands, you have other property lines and things that made it hard to get through. So in order to make it simpler and to not force as many people to have to hook on, the commission came together and tried to more align it with the other one, which was the 200 feet.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, the two didn't have to be the same. They weren't for years, but it was smarter for us to make it the same. But of course, not everything got changed like it was supposed to.
It happens.
Are there any other questions for Richard or Loretta regarding the code or the scope changes that we put in?
Does it look like there are any from the commission? Would now be an appropriate time for us to solicit the public for questions? Mark, is that good with you?
Absolutely. If they have questions about those two topics, let's address those now.
Okay, perfect. So for members of the public, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions of staff based on the presentation and discussion that you just heard. If you're interested in asking a question, you can use the reactions button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you open that up, there's a feature that says raise hand. I will do it. There you go. You see my hand is up right there. If you do that and get in the queue, I will recognize you to ask your questions. I see Brad Carey has his hand up. Brad, go ahead with your question.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. My question is this. I've reviewed and been present for the last hearing. It seems to all make sense. What is the negatives for not going through with this project? What, in other words, I guess I answered that question incorrectly, actually. I can't see any negatives for not going through with it unless we hit a horrible downward spiral in development. And even then with cheap money, it seems like there are no negatives. So my question to the commission is, can you tell me what are the negatives for moving forward?
Well, I think, Brad, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think that's the conversation that we're having. I think we're weighing this and looking at the pros and cons of extending and versus not extending, and how and where and why. And so I think we all probably have our own thoughts on it. And I'm not speaking for the commission here, but I think that's the purpose of these hearings and the presentations is to go through that.
Okay, but the demand is, as I see it, the demand is there, correct?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I think there's demand for it.
And to reduce the monthly rates for the existing 421 current connections, the way to do that is either try to cut cost or add increased connections. If we increase the connections, get up to where the city of Port Orchard is, or some of these other bigger, larger utilities, since our infrastructure is already paid for, and we're not using hardly any of the capacity of the sewer system we have, that should bring the monthly cost down if we bring on an extra 500 to 1,000 connections, right?
So I'll defer to staff on that question. I think we covered a lot of that in the last meeting. And I think there is a conversation that Mark is saying that we're going to have about rates when we get into some of the code cleanup.
Thank you.
Mr. Carey, the one thing that I would like to just clarify is that the current infrastructure is not paid for. There still is existing debt. And I actually have some additional information that I was gonna kind of walk through with the board, and really, hopefully the board would allow me to do this. This isn't information that I posted yet. I put it together kind of as an educational opportunity because I felt like we were going to have a lot of individuals present here to talk about the different sources of funds that we're currently utilizing to pay for the debt, and then to give kind of a forward look at how many more years do we have before we pay off the infrastructure that Mr. Carey was just referring to.
Great. We definitely can get into that once we're through the Q&A on the initial presentation. I think it'd be great. I have in the queue, I have Andrew McCarr and David Overton. Andrew, go ahead with your question.
Yes, my name is Andy Makar. I actually have a question that really tacks onto the whole question that they were just talking about, risk and costs and how those costs are allocated. My question is, when we put in this infrastructure, and it's going under land that's either currently held by developers or will be acquired by developers, and there's an intermediary party. What is the provision for recapturing our costs that are going under that land from developers and or those intermediary property owners? Because it seems to me that we're creating value for those parties, and we need to recapture that value to reduce the amount of money we have to protect the fisc, protect the taxpayers, and not give a unreasonable amount of profit to people that really should be reimbursing us for that. So is there a provision for doing that? Yes or no?
Yeah, great question, Andy. This was actually covered extensively in the first meeting. Mark or Loretta, do you want to provide some information for Andy on how we recapture?
So I can talk a little bit about it, Loretta, and please feel free to correct me if I say something wrong here, because I'm kind of going off some memory. But we currently have a provision to charge a capital facility charge. The amount that would be charged in this area where we're extending the sewer would be more than the $11,300 that's currently being charged for individuals to connect to the existing system, or individuals that are developing within the UGA for a future connection to the existing system. So that's one component of it. Loretta, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's correct. We have an existing capital facilities charge that is utility-wide, and that's based on the existing debt for the existing infrastructure. And so when we extend service out and we have if there's new debt taken on, then a capital facilities charge could be implemented for that area, that region. And that's one of the finance decisions that commissioners will need to take a look at, is how and what does that connection charge look like for this area.
And just to maybe add to that, that I think that there is I don't want to lose sight of an economy of scale, right? So the more customers that you have, the more fees that you collect, the more monthly revenue that you collect, and you're able to take some of the costs of operating the system and spread them over a larger group of people. I think that that's been a discussion all along with the commissioners as I look through the history of Belfair Sewer. The challenge is that there was like 412 customers that we signed up when we originally developed it, and additional development didn't occur. And so then all of a sudden the county was in a position where they didn't have funds to pay the debt. they didn't have enough funds to cover the general operations and maintenance of the sewer facility. And so as they look to say, how do we correct this or modify this? They look to say, well, where is development going to occur? And how can we encourage development to occur within these areas? And I think that the purpose of that was to add to our customer base and get the utility to a point where it could actually cover its costs. So I think that all of those things are components of this discussion. There's many pieces to it that as you look at it in options, and absolutely there's risk. I think that there's a lot of concern from both, I think the citizens that we have here that have been in Belfair since 2012, and definitely our commissioners, all are concerned about the potential risk associated with additional debt. But those are all factors that have to be taken into consideration as we make these decisions.
Yes.
If
I'm
I
sorry.
may. Oh, go ahead, Mr. McCarr.
Yeah, I mean, I am a firm believer in minimizing the risk to the taxpayer in general. And the way to do it would sound like you're talking about that facility fee. And that which is fine. I mean, if that achieves the objective, then that answers my question. I just want to make sure that that's not a theoretical thing we could do as opposed to something we will do. And I guess my question is, will we do that?
I think that the other risk mitigator is related to the change that we just had the Department of Commerce make associated with the debt. So original debt was the original agreement said that it was a revenue bond backed by the ratepayers within Belfair Utility. So the Board of County Commissioners did not want that to be an additional debt on the ratepayers. In fact, the existing debt that is paying off the original cost of creating this utility is also in general obligation debt, and it's being paid for through revenue from the 0.09 funds and the second quarter % of real estate excise tax. So again, Mr. McCarr, I think that limits the risk associated with individuals in this utility.
Well, yeah, but it kind of redistributes it to some of us that aren't in that area, doesn't it? And so I'm just saying that the best way to reduce the risk is to distribute it out to the people that will be making the greatest amounts of profits on this, which I would think would be the developers and any landowners that are going to be selling tracts to those developers. And, I just don't want, undue enrichment going to those parties. And then myself sitting up here in Cushman, outside the scope of this project, having it wind up in my property taxes. I understand there's risks. I understand there's costs, and I'm not objecting to that. I just think that there's a fiduciary duty on the part of everybody involved in the county on this to make sure that that number is as small as possible and that the other stakeholders in this pay their fair share, because you all represent us, not them.
Yeah, so stay tuned, because I'm going to talk about those revenue sources that actually pay for the existing debt, and they're not a portion of, they're not a part of your property taxes, but there are other taxes that are collected, and they're collected throughout the entire county. So you do have a point there. Commissioner Schutte, you want to go to the next question?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Netherland?
Yeah, I want to make a clarification there. The question was whether or not we have something in place to recapture that money. That was the question that was just asked, and the answer that was given was all around that, but the answer is no, we do not. As a matter of fact, the last briefing we had was the first time we ever even heard about the concept of raising it by $3,000, and that would mean we need 1,500 ERUs extra to recapture the difference, but we still haven't even briefed on that, and we still haven't even voted on anything. So at this point, the answer is no. We have nothing, and we haven't even briefed on it specifically on what to do.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't necessarily agree with you on all of that, but I think that's what Richard's talking about with some of the code changes. So I think we already discussed that they're bringing that forward to us, Commissioner. Thank you. David Overton, go ahead with your question.
Sure. Quick one for Mark. Mark, what's in the safe?
Records, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just don't want anyone
yeah.
thinking that that's where you're keeping all the proceeds from the bonds. And then for Richard, technical question, maybe it's for, I think it's for Richard, just whether you're measuring that 200 feet from the trunk lines or whether you're measuring it from the service laterals. And then one for Loretta, on the current debt on the system, what is the way that you're paying off the current debt? I believe that's through the capital facilities charge, but I wanted just you to clarify what the current plan without any expansion, how you'd be paying off the debt, the current existing debt for the sewer. Thanks.
So I can answer that question, Mr. Overton. It's we're currently utilizing these 0.09 rural sales tax funds and a portion of the second quarter % real estate excise taxes collected to pay off the existing debt. The capital facility charges that are being collected currently for the development, especially occurring in the Olympic View and Olympic Ridge areas, those proceeds are remaining in the Belfair utility, wastewater utility, to do future capital improvements that will be necessary when the system continues to move forward.
So just to clarify that the current existing debt, you don't have a facility to pay that off, either through the capital facilities charges, you're just banking those for future capital expansion.
Correct. So if you were to remember, Richard presented a pretty big spreadsheet in our last public hearing that kind of looked out over the years, and it showed some expenses that we know we're going to incur, right? We know we're going to have to replace a bladder. We know we're going to have to add a bladder when we get to having additional customers onto the system. We also know that we're going to have to do some pretty significant capital facility improvements. Richard, maybe you could help me on what year you had projected that, but I think it was to the tune of close to $3 million.
Yeah, our capital facility plan had that at like $3.3 million for an expansion of a spray field. But like I said, that's unknown for sure, whether that everything else about the plant was sized for full build out. I imagine that's true for the spray field, and that's the best I can say for that because I haven't heard back from ecology. And what else was there? Could you refresh my memory on your question, Mark?
I think that was it. That we are retaining the current capital facility charges that we're collecting within the Belfair utility to dedicated to do the capital improvements that will be needed in the future.
So I may be missing it in the details, but over the last 10 years, there's not been any plan to retire the debt through some sort of charge. So all the development that's happened on the system to date has not had some sort of charge to developers or anyone who's hooked up, any property owner, to retire the debt.
There has been a charge, David, but it has not been applied to the debt. It is sitting in the utility fund for future capital.
Okay, and when you're looking at the capital facilities charge, is there a portion of that? Is it the whole charge? And then what's the balance in that account?
I'm not sure I understand the question about the portion.
So you've collected the capital facilities charges and kept those just to defer your capital facilities expense, but you haven't used that to pay down the debt. So the only form of debt repayment over the last 10 years has either come from the commission allocating 0.09 funds or from the legislature in debt reduction.
Correct.
So that there hasn't been in the lifetime of this utility a charge that's gone on development through hookup fees to retire the debt. That hasn't been part of the program to date.
We didn't have any development to do that. I think that was the original plan, Mr. Overton, but since the development did not occur, the county had to find other opportunities to, how can we continue to stay afloat, right? How can we continue to keep this utility solvent? And so that's when they started utilizing 0.09 funds in real estate excise tax to pay the existing debt.
So because of the lack of development, they had to use those funds that would have gone to retire the debt to continue to operate the facility rather than retiring the debt.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. And then just quickly on the lateral measurement, whether it's that 200 foot where it's measured from.
And it doesn't define, it just says sewer system and to the closest point to of the property line. So as close as you can measure. My sewer line, depending on what angle it's running and adjacent and how your property line is running, if any point of that is within 200 feet, then you must connect. If you ever.
Well, I guess another way to ask that question is, does it include side sewers?
It includes laterals. It just doesn't include side sewers. To me, are the ones that come from the house.
Yeah.
I got trunk lines and laterals, any of that. That would be my sewer system. And if your property line is within 200 feet, you'll be hooking up.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then what was the original capital facilities charge?
11,300.
I'd have to look, David, way back in the original, there different capital facilities charges occurred during different stages. And Commissioner Netherland, you probably know this.
Yeah, it was $5,000 was the original one they put forward for the people within that area. But that was a short term. And that was just to try and get as many people hooked up and get cash inflow. I was not a commissioner at the time. I was just a citizen, but that was the original facilities charge.
Yeah, and it ratcheted up over the years. And basically it was an incentive, as you say, Commissioner, to get people connected right out of the gate.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, very good. Next I have Greg Sipnicki. Greg, go ahead with your question.
Okay, well, one of my questions is, and I'd like to piggyback off of one of David's questions. David talked about what's has been in the past and up to this date. Going forward, because of the development that's happened on the lower part of the hill, just up above McDonald's, with the hookup fees that we're going to be getting from, you know, the apartments and the single family dwellings and everything, once they get hooked up, isn't some of that hookup money going to go towards paying off the old debt?
I'm going to recommend to the board that they do not utilize those funds to pay off the old debt. I'm going to recommend that the board retain those funds within the Belfair wastewater utility and pay for capital improvements that we know are coming. So, you know, we know for a fact that in 2022 alone, we're going to have over $300,000 of capital improvements that need to occur within the utility, and that's maintaining the treatment side of the facility. As we get more customers, Greg, it's going to require us to. There's going to be a point in time that we have to expand, right? That we have to increase the capacity of what we currently can treat. Those costs are going to be capital improvements necessary for this utility to continue to run. And I'm recommending that if we are able to withhold the capital facility charges that we're currently collecting, I think that we've collected a little over 600,000 so far. We expect to collect another $500,000 in 2022. And then as the development occurs up on the hill for the single family residential units, I think there's about 144 up there. those fees will be collected. So, we're kind of looking at that development occurring from now until, maybe as far out as 2029. If it occurs quicker, then those capital facility charges will come in sooner, but we would utilize those to do capital improvements.
Okay. One other question that I have, and Commissioner Trask might help you answer this, because the last meeting that we had on the sewer on the 31st, when it came time to commissioner deliberations, I remember her saying, finally, I'd just like to say increasing the debt. I don't support that. And Commissioner Trask went on to talking about other ways to fund the extension, like ARPA funds and everything like that. And I know that Commissioner Netherland has been against, increasing the debt to extend the sewer all along. And, you're working hard, Mark, trying to, and I'm glad that you've changed the language in the loan. So this doesn't come back on the ratepayer, that it would be something that the county would have to absorb rather than the sewer itself. But I'm just wondering, is it possible you're barking up the wrong tree if you have two commissioners that don't support increasing the debt? I mean, the loan that you're talking about, it's going to increase the debt. There might be ways to pay it off, but I'm just asking the question, because when I heard Commissioner Trask say that she didn't support increasing the debt, I think that that's something that probably needs to be talked about.
Great. Can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
Sorry. Thanks, Greg. That was a good question. And yeah, I don't want to increase our debt at all. And I know that Mark has some options for us to take a look at. And until we get word back from the legislature, they're a little busy at this time for some strange reason, trying to take money away from the Public Works Board. That was just, yeah.
Okay.
But as soon as we get information back from that, I want to look at the big picture. There's so much to this, and so many decisions that need to be made, that I don't want to rush into a decision at all. I want to make sure that it's the best decision for all of Mason County, not just Belfair.
Well, thank you very much.
Sorry. Great. Thanks, Greg. Next up, I have George Blush. George, go ahead with your question.
How are we doing, guys? Just after coming through a pandemic, and there's a lot of small businesses that didn't make it, is this a good time to, incur more debt and have their bills go up? By extending the sewer project that's already, had enough of a hard time funding itself. I know a little something about housing around here also, and I also know that there's a lot more places up here in my neck of the woods in Shelton where we could use $8 million worth of, infrastructure added in. So I know that's what it's supposed to be used for. I'm just not sure why it's all getting sent up there. And how much is the rate going to go up for each one of the units up there if you do go through with this?
So that was, yeah, thanks, George. I can answer some of that. I think that so the reason why we petitioned the Department of Commerce to change the structure of the debt would, that if the board decided to utilize that as a financing option, then it would not go against the ratepayers. It would actually be utilizing another source of revenue. Potentially, what we're currently using is the 0.09 rural sales tax funds, which I kind of have I think it's actually a good opportunity to transition into some of that.
Yeah, let's any members of the public have any additional questions before Mark goes into the financial updates that I think would address some of the questions that we've already received? I see Judy Scott has her hand up, and then Brad, do you have another question, or is that okay? So let's go with Judy first, and then Brad.
Hi, commissioners. Thank you. Am I reading the documents correctly that it is an $8 million loan? And I've heard now, you've almost answered a question already, that the rates will not go up. Because that is a big concern, especially as a realtor and as a sewer rate payer already, that we do have one of the highest around. And I'm concerned about some of the businesses that they have, if they have to get any rate increases, it could hurt a lot of people. So can you answer that? Is it the $8 million loan? And what, I know it's not all going to the sewer extension, I think. And that's my other question. Is it going to the sewer extension? And is there even a potential of having the rates being raised? That's it. Whoever can answer.
So
I'm happy-
I can quickly answer the rate side of things. I think that the intention of the Board of County Commissioners was not to put this on the ratepayers, and therefore they asked us to change the structure of the debt to general obligation debt.
Thank you. The $8 million, what is that?
So the $8 million, so that's a great question. And there's so many details associated with this stuff. I don't want to confuse people. But the original plan for that we received from the legislature was, it quotes $12 million and it quotes $8 million. And you'll see those numbers kind of reoccurring. Mm-hmm. The $8 million was the maximum amount of the Public Works Board loan that was available to Mason County to do some of this work. I think that the original plan was to work in concert with the construction of the freight corridor in Belfair to do some of the work that Loretta referred to earlier. So they had like a purple pipe, so reclaimed water being pushed up north to our industrial areas so that they could utilize that in industry. It's another revenue source for the utility because the utility could actually sell reclaimed water to industries that have a need for water, but don't want to use treated water or I don't know, what do you call it, Loretta? Difference between class.
Potable.
Get into details.
Drinkable. This is, yeah,
Okay.
Typically the purple pipe, a frequent use is irrigation, for example, quite common.
And so that $8 million was the amount that was available to Mason County. So we think that the freight corridor is going to start here. We're knocking on wood. We definitely need some solutions for transportation in Belfair, and we think the freight corridor is going to be a big part of that. You'll see that the commissioners actually, if you've been following them on their regular meetings, they actually issued a letter to the legislature today saying, we want you to continue to keep this on track, allocate the money that's needed to do the freight corridor. And if in fact, when the freight corridor is being constructed, if there's a need, if there's a demand for reclaimed water up to the north, then I would love to have some of this Public Works Board loan, some of this $8 million available to do some of that work. What's before the board today for the sewer extension that this public hearing was originally about was 4.5 million of that 8 million.
Is it a kind of loan that you don't have to take all of it and you pull it out as needed?
Yeah, think of it as a line of credit, basically,
Okay.
Judy. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Judy. Brad, go ahead with your question.
Thank you, commissioners. Taking off from Judy's comment, so that loan or line of credit, so to speak, that we would utilize as needed, that, if I remember correctly, is locked in at 0.079%. Is that right, Mark?
Mr. Carey, there's actually different options. Okay. So there's basically three options. And the three options include, if you were able to get the project going really quickly, then you could potentially get a rate of 0.5 or 0.29, right? So 0.29 over a 20-year debt. Now, I think that since we're continuing to analyze how we want to move forward, I personally feel like that option has passed. I don't think that we could get it done and meet the construction requirements to spend the money down in order to get the 0.29%. There's another level that allows you to get it at 0.54%. over a 20-year period. That's a little bit longer of an extension period that allows us to go into the future a little bit more. And then we also have some options under the 0.79 that you referred to. So we could go with we could extend the term of the loan out instead of 20 years, do 26 years, 22 years with a partial deferral, a couple of years, or we could do a 20-year repayment schedule, deferring the loan. We wouldn't have to start paying on that loan until I think it's 2026.
So basically, we're almost getting access to free money. When does the door close on the 0.05?
2 years from April, I believe, Brad.
Okay. Well, okay. So basically, we have this line of credit with very cheap money, and we're using that borrowing power to lock ourselves in at cheap money to bring the sewer system into the black by the projected growth that's going to be already happening, plus that will happen as the freight corridor gets placed in. And we're taking advantage of, if I understand you correctly, we're taking advantage of an property owner's offer to allow an easement for these utilities to be placed in there instead of that developer closing the door and preventing this sewer project from possibly in the future having to be 3 or 4 times the cost of installation to get those connections 10 or 15 years down the road if other development occurs and we lose that tract of land that's being offered for that easement. Do I understand kind of what's going on here?
So I can't really speak to the easement part, Loretta. If you could help me, I'm assuming that's like right away. Is that right away?
Sure. It's an easement that is to be acquired. And I guess, Mr. Carey, if, for example, we did not proceed forward and if we did not secure an easement at this time, and development occurred on that property, well, we would still have a plan. We still have the plan that this is how sewer is to be extended, and the developer would be required as a condition of the development to follow that plan for the extension.
But at a considerable, as I understood it at the last meeting, that would be considerably more expensive if we didn't take an opportunity of working with undeveloped land at the moment and getting this established under our Growth Management Act requirements to get this solidified to bring the growth where we want to in the manner we want to. That allows us to reduce tremendous cost in getting it implemented now. Is that was my understanding. Is that your understanding too?
Excuse me, Brad.
Judy, I don't think, oh, there you go.
Okay.
There are,
Okay, well,
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was unmuted. I apologize.
I think you're touching on the complexity of the decisions before the board. I mean, absolutely, Mr. Carey. Those are all valid questions that the board has asked and looked at, and we're trying to pull information together to look at potential opportunities of what does that look like as we move forward, and what is our Board of County Commissioners willing to do? How do we want to move forward with it? Do we want to wait and see? And if you take the wait and see approach, then it's potential that individual comes in there, wants to develop a portion of the land and looks at it and says, gosh, I'd love to develop here, but I can't afford the $4.5 million to extend the sewer up to where I want to develop. So maybe I'll go look elsewhere to develop. Those are all questions I think that is speculation, and it's hard to determine, but we're also juggling when is traffic solutions going to come to the area, right? I mean, that's definitely a common theme that I've heard from the public is how do we solve our traffic issues up there? I know that the state has some funding in their current budgets to widen 3 and to do the freight corridor. But those are a few years out. Now, what does that look like? I think that when those things happen, I think that even, it's trying to be prepared for development is going to come. How do we prepare ourselves for that development? And how do we attract? I mean, how do we attract the development that does increase the, if we develop land, then all of a sudden now it's no longer. I think a lot of this land is in timberland. Now it's in developed land that has property taxes that we collect on it, or maybe it's a retail store that actually is starting to collect sales tax revenues. All those questions are kind of the speculation that we're trying to look at and say, what does this look like in the future?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Marilyn Corrigan. Marilyn, go ahead with your question.
Sorry. So my question, I don't know if this is the right time, but maybe, and I think it's related to all the complexity. I'm just wondering, I'm in favor of the growth. I'm in favor of sewers. I don't want septics. I want to protect the environment. I'm in favor of going. My question is, I'm assuming that this sewer plan is in coordination with the Belfair Urban Growth Plan that was talked about just a couple of weeks ago. And we're putting the sewer in the right place for that growth plan. Is that correct? I see a lot of nods.
That is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you look at it from a perspective of where do you expect development to occur. Part of having an urban growth plan is one of the other common themes that I hear from individuals in Belfair is that, we really cherish this rural community that we have, and we want to keep this rural feel to it. So as we know development will occur in the area, how do we control that, right? How do we say that the development occurs within an urban area and we can create these urban zones and then keep the rural areas rural? That's all fine and dandy until development occurs, and then all of a sudden, can you handle the traffic, right? So those individuals coming from rural areas to travel up north, have to take Highway 3, and are we prepared for that? Those are all questions that I think that this board has before them, and they're asking us to plan for, and how do we coordinate the development, the future capacity development of this area with other projects that are occurring that are really outside of our control, but we know that they're going to happen, right? So we know we were very confident that the brake corridor is going to happen. There's also money in there to expand or widen Highway 3 through that area. So planning all of that stuff is and making sure that we're all coordinated on those things, and that that we have a plan for keeping the rural areas rural. Those are all important items.
If I may pile on that just real quickly, Marilyn, you brought up a great point about the protecting the environment, and I do believe that the planned action EIS took a much sharper and closer look at what is actually developable within the urban growth area. And so, yes, the sewer extension, utilities, all the infrastructure necessary went with that more refined look at what are buildable lands and where are they located within the UGA.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Marilyn. Any other questions, or can we have Mark get into the financial discussion that he wanted to have? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So with that, Mark, we'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen, Commissioner Judy, and go through some of this stuff. So first of all, I'd like to make sure that you can all see it, and I apologize that I did not. I will make this information available to everybody. So hopefully you can see my screen right now. Can you see my screen, Commissioner Judy?
We can see it. Thanks, Mark.
So what I did is I kind of outlined these sources of revenues that are currently paying for the existing debt and potentially could be used to pay for any expansion that we incur within that area. So first of all, the rural county public facility sales tax. This is 0.09% of our sales tax that we collect here in Mason County. Since we're a rural county, it allows us, it's not an increase in the tax, it's actually, it's resulting in a credit against the amount that we send to the state. So the state normally gets 6.5% of the sales tax that we collect. We actually get to take 0.09% of that off. And really the intent of this was to be used for overall economic development and encouraging economic development within rural counties. So they have very specific uses of how you can use these funds. And you'll see that under the public facilities portion of this document. And you'll see in there that it includes things like bridges and roads and domestic and industrial water facilities, sanitary sewer facilities. I won't read it to you, but these are the requirements that we have associated with how we utilize those 0.09 funds. You'll often hear us talk about real estate excise tax. Real estate excise tax, there's actually 2.25% of real estate excise tax. And I want to make sure that the public understands this. And I know our commissioners do, but just to educate folks on this a little bit. So we have 2.25%. So 0.25% is the first 0.25% that we charge on all real estate transactions within the unincorporated area of the county. The funds that are collected from that first 0.25%, we keep separate from the second 0.25%. And those really are dedicated to projects that are listed within our capital facilities plan element of our comprehensive plan. So it's a pretty broad perspective of projects that we can use this money on. In fact, we can also use it on housing relocation and assistance. That's fairly new. I think it was added in 2019. And it can be used for the maintenance of capital assets that were developed with these funds in the first place. Then we get to the second 0.25%. And the second 0.25% is still this 0.25% on all real estate sales within unincorporated area of the county. But you'll see as you drop down into what we can use this on, you'll see A, B, and C. So it's a more defined, narrow scope. And so it still allows us to use this on sanitary sewer systems, planning, construction, reconstruction, repair, rehabilitation, or improvements of parks. So parks we actually utilize, and I'll show you here in a second how we utilize some of this money for our parks. And then we also, until January 1st of 2026, we could use this for housing projects if we decided to. There are limited options available that if you get into the laws that talk about this, and I'd be happy to provide anybody that would like the RCW reference and they can read through it. You can see what it can be used for. So hopefully this kind of helps outline the revenue that we're currently utilizing. So we're currently utilizing this second 0.25% of real estate excise tax and the 0.09 funds for paying off the existing debt. I'm going to now share with you the financial plan that we have. So right now, what I've put together here is an Excel spreadsheet of kind of projecting out. The first one is the sales and use tax. This is the 0.09 funds. And you can see that the first columns, hopefully you can see this. Can you see it okay? You can actually try and increase it a little bit.
Yeah, it's just, we can see it. It's just a little small, at least it is on my screen. So I know there's not a ton you can do about that.
Yeah, so I apologize, but I will make sure these are available for people to look at. But what you see here is that in 2020 and 2021 respectively, we collected about $878,000 in 2020 and a little over $1 million in 2021. Now, in our 2022 projected budget, we were extremely conservative in how we projected these funds, this revenue, because we didn't want to overestimate what we were going to get. And so we're projecting that we're going to get about $865,000. Pretty conservative amount, right? We think that investment earnings, we've kind of kept it at $1,000 a year over the life of this, because currently interest rates are super low and you don't make too much on the money that we have out there, especially with the limited options that we have to invest. In this calculation, you will see a small increase of 2% per year as you go into the future. One of the things that I want to specifically highlight here is that within this projection, we have an estimated, the commissioners actually put in, can you still see my Excel spreadsheet?
Yep.
Yes, okay. So you'll see here that there's an ending fund balance operating line item. So this is something that the commissioners put in place starting in 2021 that said we want to reserve 25% of the expenditures in the previous year as an operating fund balance or an operating reserve. So it's kind of, we want to set this aside. And so you'll see that each year that accounts for 25% of the previous year's expenditures. What I really want to highlight is that we pay for a number of things out of here. We pay for the state auditor's office. We pay for some of our internal allocations of costs. We pay the city of Shelton for some sewer payments. Those payments are going to go through 2026. We pay the Economic Development Council $90,000 a year, and I've just kept that consistent $90,000 all the way out through 2033. And then that last line I'm on there is the transfer out to the Belfair wastewater facility. So you'll see in 2021, we actually transferred $450,000 to help pay for the old debt on this facility. You'll see the numbers start to decline as we go into the future, and that's because our debt payments are starting to decline. I'm going to switch quickly over to the projections for the real estate excise tax second quarter percent. So in this here, in 2021, we collected $2.1 million. Obviously, these are on real estate sales. So the real estate market has been pretty active over the last couple of years. And you'll see that in 2020, we collected almost 1.6 million, 2021, 2.1 million. Our projections in our budget for 2022 dropped down to 1.5 million. And we've kept that same 2% growth factor as a conservative estimate of how we move forward. This dollar threshold can fluctuate pretty dramatically. When you were back in 2012, 2013, when we were going through a recession, you saw some 20 to 30% declines in these revenue sources throughout all counties that collected. As you drop down into the lower section of this spreadsheet, you'll see that here's some of the stuff that we actually pay for. So we actually pay for some of our operations, for some of our maintenance of our parks capital facilities. We have miscellaneous maintenance and repairs associated with our other capital assets that were originally funded through real estate excise tax. And we've set aside about $1 million to do capital improvements that are listed within that capital facilities plan of our component of our comprehensive plan. We have $50,000 budgeted in 2022 for parks capital equipment that we'd like to purchase. We transfer $75,000 out to Russellwood. That's their other utility. And we currently have budgeted to transfer $800,000 out to our Belfair wastewater facility. And you'll notice here too that you can see as you go all the way through 2033, and I went through 2033 because that's when the debt will be retired. One thing that I'd like to point out is that in 2020, the Board of County Commissioners made it a policy decision to start to reserve $400,000 per year in a restricted reserve account to be utilized for Belfair debt. So at the end of 2022, we will have accumulated $1.2 million in that reserve account. And as you go forward, you'll see that you hit 2027 and we've got 2.8 million. And then all of a sudden that number starts to decline. The reason is because at the end of 2027, we're going to have a little less than $2.8 million to pay off the entire debt. And so I just started pulling it out of the reserves as opposed to pulling it out of the revenue. And this is kind of a summary of what you're looking at for both of those different sources. You'll see here that the current debt obligations, this is for the existing debt within the Belfair Sewer. This is the amount that we owe per year. So in 2022, we owe a little over $1 million. We're going to pay 800,000 of that out of real estate excise tax and about 252,000 out of the 0.09. As you go forward into hit 2027, you'll notice that this reserve balance that we have in the real estate excise tax second quarter percent is 2.8 million. And the amount that we owe on the debt is about 2.5 million. So we have a decision point at that time, right? The nice part about the debt and the way that the commissioners structured this debt is that we can pay it off early if we choose. So come 2020, end of 2027, the Board of County Commissioners can actually make a choice to pay off that debt. I'm going to show you another screen here, and I hope I'm not making you dizzy jumping around. So this is our existing Belfair debt. We have 4 different debt instruments that are currently that were used to finance pieces of the infrastructure for Belfair.
Mark,
so we have
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt. Were you intending to change what was on the screen?
I was, and it didn't.
Did not.
Try this again.
There you go.
How's that? So this is our base. Thank you, Commissioner. So this is our Belfair wastewater utility debt. So there's 4 components of it. You'll see a 2020A LTGO is limited term general obligation debt. You'll see another issuance in 2021 where they refinanced. And then you'll see there's 2 DOE loans. So I believe those are Department of Ecology. Thank you. And so this is the corresponding amounts that you see in there are debt payments that we owe on each one of those. And so when you hit 2027, I'm going to highlight the amounts that we owe. So in 2027, if I highlight all of these amounts, or at the end of 2027, so it would actually be starting in 2028. We have, if you were to summarize all of these, it's $2.5 million left. So if we chose to pay this off, then we would actually have to notify the banks that we were going to pay it off the debt, and they would come up with a calculation of principal. The amounts that you see here include principal and interest. Once we get to this point, if we decided to use that reserve to pay off this debt, it would be less than 2.5 million. I just don't know exactly what that number would be because we would not have to pay for the interest included in those payments throughout the rest of the year.
And Mark, just real quick, are any of those, do we have early payoff penalties?
We do not. We do not. The way you guys did a great job when you redid this debt. I believe the 2021 debt or 2020 debt requires us we had a 5-year period that we couldn't pay off the debt on. But the 2021 debt, I think it's like a notification of 10 days before you're going to pay it off. So it's really flexible in that sense that the county can pay off this debt early if they choose to, which is
Commissioner, that's the reason why we went to the banks instead of bonds. You were part of that, yeah.
Yeah, I remember doing that. I just wanted to make sure that everybody else knew.
Yep. And so you can see the amounts listed for those Department of Ecology loans. We can pay those off early also. And those amounts would also be revised for the interest that we would not incur. So it would be less than 2.5 million. So that kind of, the intent of this was to really educate, just to remind my commissioners that, hey, this is how we currently have structured the debt within this utility, and what the financial forecast looks like for those different revenue sources. So you can see how we're utilizing those funds in both the 0.09 revenues and the real estate excise tax second quarter percents. And that's kind of what it looks like. And I commend you for establishing a reserve within the real estate excise tax second quarter percent, because by 2027, you're going to have an opportunity to pay this debt off early.
Great. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mark based on that information?
So Mark, just to be clear for everybody there, though, that's what we currently have. That doesn't include taking on a new debt of $4.5 million. That changes the structures that you're talking about and the repayments and the debt amounts.
Absolutely. So let me share with you just to. It's too busy. Never mind. I'm not going to share it with you. If you were to take on additional debt through the Public Works Board options, Commissioner Netherland, you would pay anywhere from an additional $191,000 to $243,000, all dependent upon how you decided to structure that loan. And so that would be related to the $4.5 million loan through the Public Works Board.
Mark, do you have the interest rates on the current debt available?
I don't off the top of my head. I'm sorry, Commissioner. I could look it up. I think I have. I don't. I have the actual debt issuance notices, but it's not right up front.
I didn't intend that to be a leading question, but we did refinance the debt, as you mentioned, and the initial debt with it was at a much higher rate, which is why we refinanced it in 2020 and in 2021. Which is still higher than the line of credit that we're discussing now. I'm trying to look for some context on kind of the decision making that we've made over the past few years in terms of being fiscally responsible with the current debt versus even the potential for the line of credit from the Public Works Board, which is at even reduced rates than the refinancing that we did. So I think it's just helpful to provide sort of that context to what the debt picture and outlook looks like. Commissioners, any other questions for Mark on that?
A lot of great information. Thank you, Mark, for putting that together. It makes it, it gives us a better picture and hopefully helps others also to see where we're at as far as our obligations currently.
So I just found the 2021 debt you guys did through Kashmir Valley Bank, and the interest rate ranges from 1.6% in 2021, and in 2030, when you pay it off, it would be about 2.05%. So it escalates up a little bit from 1.6 to 2.05. It looks like it changes over to 2.5% in 2026. So again, great job in establishing this reserve to potentially pay off the debt. End of 2027, you could potentially save 3 years worth of interest at 2.05% on the outstanding balance at that time.
And we have replaced some of the debts were as high as 3.8% that we replaced that with.
Yeah, just looking at the numbers, don't quote me on it, but I think that it's 10, 20. So, I mean, you're looking potentially at $30,000, $40,000 worth of interest savings if you decided to pay it off early, and that's just on the 2021 issuance.
And I think we also paid off other debt as well. I think it was fun watching the numbers go down.
Yeah, I think the commission has done a really good job on, managing the debt in a way that doesn't make the issue worse. But I think it's also really important for us to give credit to our county treasurer, Lisa Frazier, for managing us through all of the refinancing and really weighing the options versus, going the bank route that we ultimately decided versus doing a bond sale, and definitely pros and cons to both of those. But she was fantastic at making sure that we were putting Belfair on the best foot, so that, as we were moving forward. So it's credit to her.
And as we continue to move forward, I think there are other options that the board has to think about. So there is, we are planning on receiving some additional ARPA money from the federal government. I can share this with you. This is our master sheet that we use to track the amounts that the board has approved. So we received, make you dizzy here, about 6.5 million in 2021. Of that, the board has approved just over $6 million worth of opportunities for, this isn't all just the county. I think that Mr. Sibnicki actually asked me how much of this is related to the county. So of the 6 million, I think about 1.7 million went to county offices and departments, and then the remainder went to other entities. So a number of different projects, but we're going to receive another $6.5 million in June of 2022. And this money needs to be obligated by 2024 and spent by 2026. So this is another option that there is potential funds out there that can be utilized. An allowable use of these funds is for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So I think that that if we decided to potentially utilize a portion of these funds, this is money that came from the federal government, so it would not add to the debt of the utility.
So, and I think just a couple of other contextual points about this. So when we look at the ARPA money, that's certainly an option that's on the table that we have to discuss and should discuss, at least using it in part to assist the Belfair system. As we have already, we've committed just over $300,000 for other capital needs with the sewer system in Belfair that are unrelated to any expansion, that are just pump station improvement projects that were listed on our capital needs. And then I think looking at sort of the history of the old debt and the portion of that was paid for or intended to be paid for through development versus any kind of new expansion, those connection fees are, Commissioner Ellen, I think, said initially were around $5,000. We're currently a little bit over twice that amount now, and have another conversation in terms of just sort of clarifying what they're going to be for any expanded service area. And so just keeping in mind that there will be more of the debt borne by development in any expansion area than was born in the initial phase of the sewer when that was initially started. So definitely some conversation to have on the ARPA side, but the financing option blended with ARPA would be an option as well.
I think there's a lot of things on the table, and as we get more information, This is not an easy decision at all. Just like the EIS, there's different layers to this, and it's kind of like a puzzle, I guess. You're putting it together, but you want to make sure that all the puzzle pieces fit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the other thing is we do have some, with the legislature still in session, there's the potential to capture some additional money from the legislature on some other projects and clarifying some additional funding that they provided for the Belfair system last long session. And so there's still a couple of details that need to be figured out, as well as if this does go out to bid, seeing where those bids come back. And I think that would help us determine, if it does move forward, what is the right blend of funding, what is the right balance, and get some of those other details worked out. Commissioners, any other questions for Mark before we move into public?
Yeah, I just want to make a point because there was a lot of stuff that was just said right there. I was trying to stay out and make sure I didn't testify or give too much opinion, but I want to remind you another aspect that has to be discussed at some point is whether or not it should be done, not just whether you can. As we have other developers that have been dreaming of having monies given to them, and it just doesn't work that way. So we'll talk about that further, but since we're talking about all these different options, I wanted to make sure that that's also part of the conversation.
Yep, absolutely. There's always an option to do nothing. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, let's move into public comment. This is an opportunity for folks to make comment on the presentation tonight. And to, again, we move into the public comment period, try to keep your comments to about 3 minutes per person so that we can make sure that everybody has a chance that wants to make a comment to do so in a timely manner. And so again, just use your raise hand feature and the chair will recognize you. Right now I have Brad Carey's hand up. Brad, go ahead with your comments.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Thanks for taking my public comment. After the first half of the public hearing here a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, tonight's information plus the stuff I've read, I'm pleading with the commissioners, all three of you, to please approve of this extension. Very rarely in life do you get everything lining up. Everything goes in cycles. It seems like everything goes in cycles. There's housing booms, there's recessions. This, we're probably a little bit behind. There's a time to tread water and there's a time to swim with the current. And right now, you guys, you can swim with the current. You got cheap money available. You've got the need pounding on the door. You've got, we're going to continue to own this sewer project or the sewer infrastructure. This, whether it goes down a state highway, whether it goes through a big, large tract of land, the developers don't own the sewer trunk and laterals, as I understand it. That's an asset that the taxpayers, ratepayers, the sewer district own. You've got very inexpensive money. You've got all kinds of sources of money. It complies with the plans on phase 3 that you've been, pushing forward for many years now. It complies with our Growth Management Act. It complies with our urban growth area that we've defined, and it's going to prevent urban sprawl. So please push this through and let's not waste any more time. Mark has explained we can extend the period that we pay off the debt if we did hit a recession. So it's a no loser. We can't lose on a deal like this. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Next up, I have Andy Makar. Andy, go ahead with your comments.
Yes, I just want to say, and I'll revisit my concern on it. I understand what Mr. Carey's saying, and I don't necessarily disagree with him in theory. My only observation is I don't want to be leaving any money on the table. We may own the actual equipment itself, the pipes and what have you, but that development confers added value to property owners who, frankly, when they develop the property or when they sell to developers, are going to make a lot of money. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't want to make sure that you guys are not leaving money on the table. That's my question. point. And we just don't rush into it and then wind up saying, well, we forgot about that, or we overlooked that, or what have you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andy. Next I have Greg Sitnicki. Go ahead, Greg.
Yes, I don't disagree with Brad either. I think that the sewer, having the sewer extend, on the other side of the railroad tracks and pick up all the subdivisions and everything, I think is really necessary. The thing that I have a concern about is that in the past, it seems like development pays for development. And even if we use ARPA funds, even though that's better than extending our debt, however way you pay it, if development doesn't invest in their own profit, what kind of a precedence does that set? We've seen, where a lot of times people who, well, I'll just leave it at that. I just think that development, it's traditional that development pays for development. And I think that the commissioners ought to look at whether they're doing, whether they're setting a precedence or not. And I think that a lot of times people that are connected and have a lot of resources, sometimes taxpayers and politicians tend to be over generous with them. And I just think we ought to take a look at it. If there's a lot of money to be made by adding the sewer, and it increases the property values by, at least as much as what the sewer costs to be put in, I just feel that and that's just my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for any group of people. And that's all.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Next up, we have Judy Scott, and then I see David Overton with a hand up as well. Go ahead, Judy.
I would concur that we need a plan for to recoup the loan money, because as Commissioner Nevin had said, that there really isn't a plan. So I'd like to see that before you continue on with any decisions. So that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you. David, go ahead with your comments.
Hi, thanks for taking testimony tonight. There are a couple of recurring themes that I've heard over this. One is, we don't want any new debt on a facility. And a few just points of clarification that I heard tonight is, when you decide not to take the funds that would pay down the debt and put them in a reserve account, you're in essence perpetuating the debt over time. You're choosing not to pay it down. And I don't disagree with that conversation, but I think these platitudes of no new debt, development paying for development, or, oh, well, we did it that point at the beginning because we wanted to incentivize growth. Those platitudes all kind of sound like election statements to me versus policy statements of how do we deal with this. And utilities and government shouldn't pick winners and losers. And I do think that there has to be some sort of partnership in how development is paid for, but it also needs to be blind to who it is. And I'm not just saying that because it's for my benefit, but because I truly believe it. There have been developments in Belfair, in Shelton, in every urban growth area that have received municipal services, and those municipal services then don't recapture a portion of the sales proceeds. There have been developments in Belfair that have happened after the sewer and sold. And, the county has ways to recapture and ways to finance that the private sector doesn't. And so the county takes risk, but it has ways to mitigate that risk. The private sector takes risk, and it has very few ways to mitigate that risk. So I hope we can all move past kind of the statements that allude to me by this project, because I think that's a terrible precedent to set for the next project. Any other sewer extension or utility extension that should be kind of a run-of-the-mill project, looked at and decided based on the policies in place, versus saying, hey, we're worried about this because it's going to enrich one individual. The county shouldn't be thinking about that in that way. And if it does, it will bind itself to a way of making decisions that it will never get out of. And frankly, I don't know that that's why these debt facilities are financed at local governments if they play that way. So I would encourage the county to look at the policy. I'm happy to hear that the county is going to look in the future at a code revision to unify its code language around sewers. I think that's a great helpful step forward. But I would just caution the commission to think about removing itself from talking about individual projects that would benefit from a trunk line extension, because it just turns into a very difficult conversation of which there is no easy way out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Jeff Carey. Jeff, go ahead with your comment.
Yes, thank you, commissioners. Just 3 points. One is, I've been around in the community involved with sewer development for the last 25 years. One thing I see that's needed is that we do need a developer type policy that's uniform, because it appears is, however I look at it, it doesn't appear that it's being executed blind to who's ever doing it. So I think it, because I know from experience what I've done, I know that another developer has paid, and 2 other, like Lakeland and Cedarland Homes and others are paying to develop, to extend trunks. And we just need to get the policies in sync so that it's a balanced playing field for all participants, and that the county is not any more on the hook than it already is. In listening to tonight's presentation, it seems like until tonight, I was not aware that the approach that you were taking, but it sounds like the county is taking the approach that even if there is a downturn, the amount of funds, it looks like to me, you'll either pull it from 09 or REIT if there's a downturn. If that's the case, just make it clear to the people that's what's happening, because that's creating a lot of confusion, because we all have the history that we've known what's happened to Belfair and this county as a whole over the years, and there's good times and there's bad times. So we need that clarified. The other thing, more of a technical issue, I like to see the county get a good deal on things. And I'm still troubled by the fact that you have a lift station. Nobody's adequately explained it to me why you have a lift station that's $1.5 million, that only pumps 200, roughly 200 gallons a minute, as compared, for example, like in North Bay Case Inlet, there's a pump station in the RV park. It pumps 208 gallons. It has a little bit less head than what you're doing, technically speaking, but there is no way in God's green earth that's $1.5 million to build that thing today. And, fine, just share with me what it is that you're doing, what the county's engineered to do with it, and that's fine. I mean, maybe it adds up to that, but I cannot see how spending $1.5 million for a lift station is a good deal for the county. And finally, again, crossing the tracks at 1.2 million. When you did North Bay Case Inlet, you did a 30-inch sleeve bore under Highway 3 at the widest part of one of the widest parts of Highway 3 in Allen. And that, true, that was 20 years ago, but even with inflation and cost, increases and what have you, it was nothing even close to this. So I guess there's 2 points I look at that project. It seems like unless somebody can show me where that really is, coming down, we need a better deal for the ratepayers as well as the county in the event that there is a downturn, so the loan is not
any larger than it has to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other members of the public have comment? Can just use the raise hand feature. Anybody else have comment? Brad, I see your hand up. Just want to make sure nobody that wants to make their first comment has an opportunity to make their first comment. Okay. All right. Seeing no additional hands, Brad, go ahead with your.
Yeah, thank you for one last comment. So I agree with my brother, Jeff. Is it my understanding that this will be put out to bid, competitive bid?
Correct. It would,
Oh, I guess
it would have to be.
Okay, good. Well,
If we
so
move
that
forward.
hopefully would, put that issue to rest. We'd try to get the best deal we can. That's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments from members of the public? One last time, any other comments from the members of the public? Okay, seeing none, would close public comment, move into commissioner deliberation, and then just as a clarification, Mark did ask or did make a recommendation that we continue the hearing. Do you want to, can you confirm that, Mark, and then we can get into deliberation?
Yeah, I'd like at least 30 days to pull together some additional information for the board to consider.
Okay. Okay, commissioners, any deliberation or emotion on that recommendation?
I would go ahead and make a motion that we extend the hearing an additional 30 days for more information.
Okay, do you want to set a time for that hearing so that we don't have to change it again?
I definitely want it in the evening so that we can keep our folks here. So if we do it for 30 days, that would put us, well, our next meeting would be the 29th of March. Mark, do you think that would give you enough time? Or do we need to look into
I was actually looking at April 4th or 5th, but
I'm going to April.
I mean, do we want to do it on a Tuesday? I think that's kind of I guess it doesn't have to be a Tuesday, but it seems like that's the public actually knows that we meet on Tuesdays and those individuals that are interested can attend. And
so
I like the idea of having it in the evening, your recommendation.
So April 5th.
That would work for me. Loretta, Richard.
Okay, so to clarify, Commissioner Trask, your motion is to continue the hearing until April 5th at 6 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second? I will second that motion. It's been moved and seconded to continue the public hearing on the proposed extension of the Belfair Sewer until April 5th at 6 p.m. Commissioners, any discussion?
Yes, I have some. I'm just going to touch on some points. I definitely think that we need to get past this and move forward. We need to have a comprehensive plan on what we're doing with our system, and we need to have it brought to the public again. But again, on the comprehensive plan, we keep doing this and finding out new information or make new changes each month, each week. It shows that it's not baked right. It's still not correct. We still don't have the right numbers. We're still working daily to get something new. So with that, I want to make clear that I am actually in favor of the sewer going up there. I'm just not in favor of us paying for it to do it. I've been trying for years to get a mechanism to reclaim our investment if we were to do it. And up to this point, it hasn't happened. I think that should be done before we make investments into it. We should figure out how we're going to reclaim that money and how we would put it on. With that also being said, a couple points in some of the conversations we had. I love this line of credit thing and the percentage rate, but that's great if we could actually use it to pay off the older debts and get a lower rate, but that's not allowed with this money. If it was, I'd be asking for us to please borrow that money to pay off some of our higher debts with higher interest rate. It was made some comments about whether or not taking these debts or paying for them out of REIT, whether it would be an increase to the taxpayer or not. Technically it would not increase their taxes, but it definitely, money can't be used twice. If you borrow it and use it out of REIT, you're still not going to be able to use it for something else. So we have to keep that in mind. But the worst part is if we borrow it, or if we, however we go to pay that off that way, if we have a downturn, it may come out of general fund. I've been there before and seen it. And when it comes out of general fund, that's laying people off. Now, one of the things that was brought to our attention was said that if we do this, it'll bring us into the black. I have never seen any scenario that has ever showed that at all. I would love to finally get some type of cost benefit analysis, somebody to show us what we will actually get for this investment. It's never happened. So how could anybody even say it's going to put us in the black? You don't get out of debt and put into the black, out of, you know, if you're in the red, by borrowing more money to do it. It just doesn't work that way in the real world. So we have to be careful when we're even talking about things like that, because it's not accurate. There was a comment from staff. I understand why they want to use the capital facility charges for the things that are going to be needed to be fixed in the future. The reason why they want to do that is so that we don't take on more debt to fix them. It's literally that simple. So if we don't want to take on more debt to fix them, we don't want to take on more debt. The more debt we take on, no matter how you look at it, is not beneficial. Now, maybe if somebody would do the work and we had a cost benefit analysis to show us that we could actually get the money and get the profit back out of this within 20, 30 years, it'd be a better discussion to have. But right now, we've never had that as a commission. It just doesn't exist. And I want to read something into the record, into the board. It was an email that was sent, and I was going to talk about the last time, but for some reason I didn't. It must have been because I was supposed to talk about it today. When it comes for developers paying for their own development, we had 168 different people that were telling us two things they don't want us to do. They don't want us to take on more debt, and they believe that developers should pay for development. This was an email that was sent to all the commission from a developer, Rick Krieger. Commissioner Judy Scott, Netherlands. The letter is in response to your proposal to extend the sewer system north onto Overton property and the backs of the current ratepayers. This is the most egregious action I've seen come out of Mason County in recent history. You have already burdened us with the current sewer project over our objections, which has never finished, i.e. extensions of side roads like Romance Hill, where there are currently 35 residents not hooked up to the sewer or the sewer treatment plant. As a landowner, owner of the Belfair Urgent Care Building, developer of Romance Hill, and owner of land, I would like to be developed and connected to the sewer system. I think this proposal burdens or borders on insanity. Over the past 6 months, in coordination with the developer, I've had discussions with Public Works on trying to get a 70 to 90 lot subdivision approved at the top of Romance Hill. In discussions with Public Works, I would have to pay the extension of the sewer line up Romance Hill, which will eventually tie into the bypass. Why do you want to spend taxpayer dollars on a sewer extension onto private owners' land, all based on speculation? ? We are coming into a time where development could slow down drastically. Over the next 10 years, as costs rise, the interest rates climb. Remember the inflation interest rates that we saw in the 80s. Any development north of town could come to a halt in 5 years, and this could become a sinkhole. I'm proposing a 70 to 90 hookups in the near future, as well as the current 35 existing unconnected residences. That's 100 new connections, and I cannot get the county to pay for the extension of the sewer, or my sewer main. Now you want to extend that sewer main on future speculation. This proposal makes no sense. Developers, for the most part, pay for utilities to be extended, or they negotiate where there's a benefit to all the parties. You really need to slow down and hire a business development consultant to review an extension of the sewer system. Thanks for your consideration, Rick Krieger. And the reason why I'm saying that is I know I got calls from other developers bigger than this, saying the same thing. And I know that I'm sitting here looking, and I know Jeff Carey had to pay for his, and he's got the only latecomers agreement we have in this county, because that's how we do it. That's how we've always been doing it when we have these extensions. They pay for it themselves. That makes their land more valuable, and they build on it. And as they can afford to build on it, can afford to expand on it, then growth happens, not just as that's throwing the money out there. So with that being said, that's why I'm still standing against this. It needs to be comprehensive. It should be the same playing field for every single person that's out there, as was asked for. But even more than that, we should not be even talking about taking money or expending such large funds of money without a comprehensive plan on the system and a cost-based analysis to show what we can get out of it, when we could eventually get paid back for it, and have a structure to recoup that money if we're going to invest into private property. So with that, that's my opinion, and that's why I'll be standing against the idea of trying to move this thing forward even one more time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trask, any comments?
I think we have a lot that we have before us. A lot to think about, a lot to study. We also have mandates from the state that we have to extend or provide utilities and infrastructure within an urban growth area. So I don't want us to lose track of that at all. So I guess if I could just ask a question real quick, a clarifying question, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Go for it.
Who paid for the original lines for the original sewer? Was that in the loan, the original loan?
85% was paid by grant.
Okay, but it was the county that put the line in?
Contracted it out.
And Loretta, is that line owned by the county? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. That was just one of my questions. I've got so much to think about, so much to study. We're still needing information from Commerce. We've got the ARPA funds. We need to make sure or look at those. We also have funding coming from the legislature, well, potential funding. So I want to make sure that we have everything in a row so that the next commissioners, maybe it's not me, maybe, I don't know, it may not be any of us further down the road that has to make this next decision. But I want to make sure that decision is made by us so that they can move forward and not have to have, I guess, chaos in the chambers. I know we're all passionate about this. I want us all to make sure that we make the right decisions for Mason County. And I know that we all will. So with that, I'll wait for the vote.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll make a couple of comments and I'll try to be as brief as I can. And I apologize if I'm not brief. Hope you bear with me. So I'm obviously in support of continuing the public hearing for 30 days. Staff has proven to us over the past month between the first hearing and tonight that they're able to work on complex issues and provide detailed responses. And I'm more than willing to give them an additional couple of weeks to continue to refine the details on this plan and come back and receive an update and then ultimately receive more public input. I think we've gotten a lot of really good feedback, some mixed feedback, definitely some varied opinions on this. And I understand that this is a big decision for the county. Certainly not one that I think Commissioner Trask or Nevin would take lightly. This has been the sewer system, as I said in the January 31st meeting, is a frustrating topic, and I can absolutely appreciate where Commissioner Nevin is coming from. It's frustrating to not have been able to solve this in a decade. It's a complex issue. We're dealing with markets and we're dealing with parts of our planning and development codes that need to be revised, and really looking at the debt from a 30,000 foot level and saying, how do we manage this? How do we make this work for the county? How do we make this work for Belfair? And then putting our county on solid footing going forward. And so that's, I think, the approach that staff has taken, and I think they've done a tremendous job at really hammering down on this and figuring it out. So I appreciate all the effort that staff has put into this over the next month. And they brought back really good news. I think I don't want any of that to be missed in the discussion tonight. The $87 rate increase that was never the intent of this commission is gone. It's gone, okay? And so that's a big win for the county. That's a big win for Belfair. Whether we move forward or not with this, staff was able to drill down on that and get Commerce to be responsive to us. And they looked at what our intent was when we adopted, when we voted to take the loan line of credit in 2020. And it was that we didn't want to do this based on rates. And so that's really good news. That's a big takeaway for the public tonight, that we heard that there was going to be this big $87 rate increase if we did this expansion, and the commission held true to their word. We said we didn't want that. We got it removed. And so we're not going to do that. We held true to our word. The commission also has worked really hard over the past few years to restructure the old debt. Mark provided us with really good data on the future over the next 5-10 years of where we are with the existing debt. Commissioner Netherland mentioned that some of the original loan portion of the sewer was at 3.8%. We got that debt down to 1.69, 1.68%, all the way that can go up to 2.05%. We've been fiscally responsible with managing the debt on the Belfair sewer that we all inherited. And we're taking lemons and we're trying to make lemonade here. But we also can't just be in this holding pattern where we're not planning for the future. Last week, we took action on a planned action environmental impact statement that helps us guide and plan for growth in the Belfair urban growth area. This was a really important step forward for our county because of a couple of reasons. One, we were able to address the issues of traffic and how do we work on fixing some of those traffic pattern issues that people talk about all the time in Belfair. We're charging development to help offset some of those costs. We know that there's a gap that we're still going to have to make up, but we're saying for the first time in our county's history, we're going to put more of that on the backs of developers who want to come in into our community and invest. And so that's a positive thing. That's a really positive thing to help manage growth and guide it out of critical environmental areas in the Belfair urban growth area and put it where it makes the most sense, outside of those critical areas. Now, I know Commissioner Netherland read a letter from another developer in town, and I don't necessarily think it's a good idea for us to pit developers against developers. We want as many people to come to Belfair and Mason County and invest as they want to. We want to be open for business. Commissioner Netherland, I don't think that was his intent. He spent a long time on the Mason County Economic Development Council and has had conversations with developers and has seen the prospect list that we work with the State Department of Commerce on. And we see the types of businesses that are looking in Mason County to locate. And we always have to be mindful of what the gaps are. We have a lot of land, but a lot of that land doesn't have the necessary utilities. Sometimes it's missing water. Sometimes it's missing power. Sometimes it's missing sewer. Sometimes it's all three. And so we have an obligation to plan for those opportunities so that we can capture them and we can work collaboratively with people that want to invest in our county. That is, on the whole, a good thing. Now, the issue of debt is also an important thing that we've already talked about a little bit tonight. But I want to point out that if we have a policy in this county of no new debt, then that really is something that we need to be really thoughtful about. There's a difference between debt, and I know I'll probably get hammered for saying this, but there is differences in debts. I would say that the old debt on the sewer is not good debt. I think that the potential for the Public Works Board financing that we have is better debt. I think you can make the argument that is better debt for the system than the old debt that we're spending a lot of time on. But we've used loans and other financing vehicles to do projects in other systems in the past. Municipal debt is a boring topic, but an important topic. And if we're saying no new debt for anything, then that really jeopardizes our ability to deliver on important projects, including public safety projects and other things that we might have to encounter in our work as county commissioners. And so I want us to be mindful of that if we're going to slam the door on any debt, then we need to have those conversations about what that might mean for our ability to deliver for the community on projects that they really need. And so, again, I wasn't really brief there, and I apologize for it, but I want the community to walk away with a couple of takeaways tonight. And one is that we have been fiscally responsible in managing the old debt. We're being thoughtful about how we expand the system and trying to do it in a way that that meets our growth management goals, but at the same time allows for growth. And the rate increases that were talked about a month ago are no longer on the table. And so there are some positive things. And so I'll conclude my comments and say I look forward to coming back in another month with more information from staff, presenting that to the public, and then receiving your testimony on the 1st. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to do a clarification on the email from Rick Krieger, pitting one developer against another. I did not talk to Mr. Krieger beforehand. I did not talk to him after. This was a letter that he sent in to you and Commissioner Trask and to the community. He put his own name out there, his own issues, and I read in the record what he had asked for us to be in the record the first time. So I didn't just jump over to do it. This was one of the best ones that was written and explained it very clearly from a developer standpoint for fairness. So I want to make that clear about his email.
No, and I appreciate that. And I said I didn't think you intended to do that. You know, and I will also point out that we received about 160 other emails on the issue, and those are all public record, and they're linked in the last packet from the meeting. And if we wanted to cherry pick letters from there, I'm sure each of us could find a letter that would match our viewpoint. That's all.
I know I can find 169 of them for me for what I'm saying. So
right, yeah, okay, that's fair. But I mean, if we're going to sit and read all those letters, then I mean that's that's your choice, I guess. But okay, having gone through the deliberation, I'll call the question. Commissioners, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
And the motion carries. With that, we will close our public hearing and go back to our agenda here. I believe we have reached the end of our agenda, and so I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded, we adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. We are adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.